The Children in the Box. Written by Steppie Morris. Illustrated by Patricia DeWitt-Grush and Robin Dewitt. Not long ago, war made life in America extremely difficult. To make matters worse, medicine and doctors were scarce, and diseases weren't easily controlled. Many died. Some were parents, and when both parents died, their children were left on their own, all alone. This story is about two of those children. Once, not so very long ago, there was a box. Inside this sturdy box lived a young man, nearly 10, and his 5-year-old sister. They didn't have a mom anymore. They didn't have a dad either. Now they took care of each other. The box they called home sat behind a row of houses. In winter it would snow, and they huddled together to keep warm. The people that lived in the houses threw stuff away. Sometimes the boy would find things they could use or wear, like ragged blankets, old threadbare coats, or worn-out shoes. Sometimes he found food. The young man worked hard. His father had taught him to be honest and not to steal, so the boy did his best to earn his own way. He learned how to shine shoes, and he sold pencils too. He would buy biscuits or day-old bread from the back of the town bakery with his money. Once in a while, they weren't so hungry. Christmas approached. The boy gazed with fascination into the store windows as he waited for someone to need a shoe shine. So many items caught his eye. "Oh, wouldn't it be grand to get something special for my sister for Christmas?" he whispered against the cold glass. A pretty doll with golden curls, a warm blue coat, or fancy white mittens would make the perfect present. He also spied delicious things like apples and oranges and caramels, taffy and candy canes. Could he work hard enough, earn enough money to buy not only something to fill their bellies, but also a small gift for his sister? How her eyes would twinkle if he gave her something sweet to eat. How she would hug him over a warm new coat. Or what about a doll? What a surprise that would be! After dreaming about all the wonderful things he could buy her, he set out on Christmas Eve to work even harder. He approached a man in a tall black hat. "Sir, I'm guessing you'd like a nice shine before Christmas. It will only take a moment." But the gentleman said, "Sorry, young man, I'm in a hurry." The boy tried a man with a bushy mustache. "Why, sir, the winter weather seems to be all over your shoes. Can I shine them up?" But the man replied, "Not tonight, son. Maybe some other day." He tried the next person. "Wouldn't you like some pencils for Christmas?" But people's arms bulged with all sorts of packages, and most of them just rushed on their way. As the crowd started to thin and shops began closing for the night, the young man checked his pockets. 3 dimes, 7 nickels, and 10 pennies. Only 75 cents. It wouldn't be enough for what he dreamed of buying, but it was more than twice as much as he earned most days. He would try one last customer. A brown-haired lady in a pretty red coat dashed out of the store with arms full of colorful presents. "Ma'am," he said in a polite voice, "would you like to buy some pencils?" "I'm afraid not. She stopped and scanned the young boy's face. He felt very self-conscious of his frostbitten nose and cheeks, his oversized tattered coat, and the enormous, worn-out shoes that barely covered his feet. But he adjusted his cap and stood a little taller. A smile grew on the woman's face as she rearranged her parcels and reached for her handbag. "On second thought, young man, I will buy 2 of your best pencils, if you please." He selected 2. She handed him a quarter in exchange. His brown eyes grew round. A whole quarter! No one had ever paid so much for 2 pencils. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. "Thank you so much." Now he had a whole $1. His mind danced over the delicious and wondrous things he could buy. He couldn't keep the grin off his face. The kind woman turned and hustled down the sidewalk. As she strode toward the street corner, she pushed her coin purse into her handbag, but she missed, and it fell with a soft clink to the ground. Not noticing, she hurried on her way. The young man rushed to pick it up. "Ma'am, you dropped your purse," he yelled after her. The sputter of traffic and crowds of noisy people smothered his voice, so he raced after her. When he reached the corner, she had already crossed, and he had to wait. The police officer finally stopped the cars and allowed the pedestrians to walk, and the young man raced across. By the time he stood on the opposite side of the street, he couldn't see her anymore. He searched up and down the sidewalk, even peeking into cars along the curb, hoping to find her. What was he going to do? He remembered that some women put their address inside their purses. He unlatched the ornately beaded coin purse with hesitant fingers. He nearly choked. A $10 bill? $10? He'd never seen that much money at one time. With $10, he could buy warm things to wear, food to eat, something sweet, and maybe even a doll for his sister. Everything he dreamed of and more. Visions of incredible things danced across his mind. He felt the crisp bill in his fingers and heard his thoughts say, "Now it can really be Christmas." He shook the thought away, but others replaced it. "Why shouldn't you keep the money? What has life given you? It took your parents, your home. This is your chance to have something for a change." Memories flashed through his mind. His mother holding his hand, washing a scrape, fixing his favorite meal, tucking a blanket under his chin at bedtime with a kiss on the tip of his nose. His father showing him how to carve, talking with him as they walked to the grocer's, including him when helping their neighbor, asking him questions that made him think. He missed them so much that it felt like a part of himself had died too, leaving a gaping, painful hole in his middle. A tear slid down his cheek, and he whisked it away with his long coat sleeve. He was the provider now, and he worked hard. It was his turn, and $10 was a chance that wouldn't come along again. He hadn't stolen it. In fact, he'd tried to return it. He crossed back to the familiar side of the street and headed to the store to make some long-deserved purchases. But his father's voice echoed in his head. It reminded him of lessons taught long ago, lessons his father still expected him to live up to. The money wasn't his. It belonged to the kind lady in the red coat. He had to return her coin purse and the $10. His excited heart sank. He checked again. Sure enough, he found her name and address written in pretty handwriting on a small, thick piece of paper. It wasn't any road he was familiar with. He checked the street signs. Definitely not nearby. He searched up and down the sidewalk for someone who could help him. A taxicab driver leaned against his car, waiting for someone to need a ride home. He'd heard taxi drivers always knew where everyone lived. "Sir," he said with confidence he didn't feel, "do you know this address?" The boy handed off the card. The cab driver eyed him with curiosity and tapped the card. "This is where you want to go?" "Yes, I think so," said the boy. "How much would it cost for you to take me there?" The driver eyed the ragged, dirty boy. As he rubbed a hand over his scruffy chin, he asked, "Well, how much you got?" The boy stared down at his muddy shoes, not wanting to say. He'd worked so hard, and the money he'd earned was for food and a gift for his sister. With a sigh, he gave an honest answer. "I only have $1." The taxi driver hid a grin behind his hand and thought a moment. "I can drive you there for $1. After all, it is Christmas Eve." "Oh, thanks." With a half-hearted smile, the young man climbed into the back seat of the big car and slammed the door shut. He tried to ignore his disappointment at not being able to buy all the lovely things he'd imagined. Instead, he watched with quiet wonder as big buildings, all kinds of houses, and many different people breezed by in a colorful blur as the taxi driver drove him clear across town. When the cab slowed, They were far from his sister and their home in the box. In this part of town, the houses stood very, very tall. The driver pulled to the curb and whistled a long, drooping note. "Well, you picked a humdinger. This here's the place." "Thank you, sir." The boy reached into his pocket and hesitantly handed over his hard-earned change before sliding out of the cab. Now, what was he going to do? He was far from home and had given up all his money to return this coin purse. His father's voice whispered in his head, "Have courage, son, and always be the best version of yourself." He hiked up his oversized breeches, took a deep breath, and headed toward the gate. The young man pushed with both hands to make the black iron gate creak open. The enormous brick house loomed in front of him. He passed a still fountain as he marched up the curving path, the gravel crunching under his feet. The manicured yard rolled on forever with half-melted patches of snow covering grassy hills, massive trees with bare branches stretching skyward, and spiral-trimmed evergreen bushes dotting the yard. He trekked toward the house and wiped his sweaty hands on his pants. Up, up, up he climbed. He approached the most enormous doors he had ever seen. 2 giant pine wreaths hung from long ribbons. The bright red holly berries looked good enough to eat, but he knew better. He stood there, not quite knowing what to do. He had never been to such a grand house before. It was so big and beautiful, old stone and black metal, so many windows that he couldn't count them all, and a park full of endless grass and trees. The young man spied the button for the bell. He closed his eyes as his shaky hand reached out, and his finger pressed it. Church bells echoed loudly inside the house, causing him to take a step back. As he waited and wondered what would happen next, he nervously twisted his hands. The door finally opened, revealing an official-looking man with a large nose. The boy figured it was the butler. "May I help you?" the man asked in a low, bristly voice. "Please, sir," the boy forced out. "Is the lady who lives here home? I have something for her." The man in his crisp black suit arched one bushy eyebrow. "The lady of the house cannot be bothered this evening," he stated. "You will have to come back another time." The man promptly closed the door. But the young man couldn't return another time. He stretched out his finger to press the doorbell again, and looking forward to it ringing out like church bells chiming. Sure enough, they sounded lovely. The butler swung open the door with a grumpy scowl. "I told you, the lady of the house is busy. It is Christmas Eve. Be on your way." "But please, sir," the boy said, "I can't come back. Could you please get the lady of the house?" "No," the butler snapped. "You don't understand," the boy rushed on, tears clouding his eyes. "I live too far away. This is very important." The butler barked, "I am sorry. Now go." The man started to close the door, but a kind, feminine voice stopped him. "And who is visiting us this Christmas Eve?" she asked. The butler swung the door open, revealing the youthful visitor. "Oh my," she said, surprised. "You are the young man selling pencils in town." "Yes." The boy relaxed a little, drew the purse from his pocket, and thrust it toward her. Her eyes went wide. "Well, goodness me, please do come in." She smiled and gestured inside. "It is a cold evening, and I imagine you would like to get warm." He stepped into the house onto a thick carpet. He wished he could take off his shoes and wiggle his feet into the soft, plush strands, or that he could take it home to his box. He and his sister would fall right to sleep with this as their bed. He followed the kind woman, but his eyes bounced from one interesting item to another. A grandfather clock, tiny statues, skinny vases, and a huge painting of people riding horses decorated a soaring entranceway. He inhaled a breath laced with flowers and coal smoke, reminding him a little of the home he used to know. As they entered the next room, he couldn't believe his eyes. Shining diamonds dangled from the grandest light he'd ever seen, sending millions of glittering lights dancing all over the room. "Wow," he whispered. She led him to a couch strewn with fat pillows, where she sat to face him. He didn't dare sit on the beautiful cushions. He eyed the large bowl of candy on the glass table near them, each piece wrapped in gold and cream paper. "It appeared you had something for me," the lady reminded him. "Yes, ma'am." He held the coin purse carefully with both hands. "After you bought my pencils, you dropped this. I yelled, but you didn't hear me, and I ran after you, but couldn't cross the street fast enough, and then I couldn't find you anywhere." He laid the purse in her outstretched hand. "It was kind of you to go to so much trouble." She examined him with wide green eyes. "I live quite a distance from where you were selling pencils. How did you travel so far?" "Well," he replied, "I found a taxicab driver that knew your address. He drove me here for $1. Her mouth pinched into a thin line. With anxious fingers, she unclasped the coin purse and rummaged through it. Her eyes slowly met his. "Young man, there is money here. Why did you not buy yourself new boots or a coat, or even a Christmas treat? Why did you come all this way to return it?" He shrugged and shoved his hands into his pockets. It was the right thing to do. The smile on her face grew. "I have never met such an honest, upstanding young man. Thank you," she said. "May I have the pleasure of driving you home?" "Oh, I would like that. I'm not even sure which way home is." "Do you live near the store where we met?" she questioned. "Yes," he said in a bright voice. "Well, let us be on our way." As she rose from the couch, he followed her. A man with a thin, dark mustache held the door as they slid into the back seat of a long, shiny car. "Would you tell me about your family?" she asked as they glided along the road, the car purring and rumbling through his whole body. "I have a little sister," he answered. "She's 5. He worried about her with how long he'd been gone and how dark it had gotten. "I had an older brother who would regularly ask me to leave him alone. Does your sister bother you and your friends?" she asked with a twinkle in her eye. "No." He leaned his chin on the windowsill, and his breath fogged up the glass. "She's my best friend." "My goodness, not many brothers would say such a kind thing about their sisters," she said. "And where do you go to school?" "I don't," he stated with a sigh. "I work. I'm the man of the house now." "Oh, I see." A moment passed before she asked another question. "And what are your Christmas wishes this year?" The young man rattled off many of the items he'd dreamed about when he'd seen the $10 bill. Mid-sentence, he blurted out, "We're here." He pointed out the front window. "Turn there, right there." The driver followed his finger and turned, slowing into the murky alley to avoid slushy puddles, garbage cans, and crates of all sizes. "Thank you for the ride," the boy said. The lady grabbed his arm before he climbed out. "I don't want to drop you off here. Let me drive you to the front of your house. I'd like to meet your parents and commend them on what a fine young man they're raising." He bit his lip as he stared out the window into the dim twilight. "My parents have both," his voice caught, "died." He swallowed back the lump in his throat. "I am deeply sorry." Concern wrinkled her forehead. "Well, if you don't have any parents, where do you live?" He hesitated, then pointed out the front window. "In that big box." "You live where?" Her surprised gaze searched the dark alley, brightened only by the car's headlights. "Right there, the biggest one," he said, an anxious foot tapping on the floorboard. "I do need to go. My sister isn't used to being alone this long. She's probably scared and crying because I should have been home before dark." The woman straightened in her seat and stared out the window. "May I meet her?" she asked. He thought for a moment. She had been so kind, bought his pencils, given him a ride. He nodded. The creases relaxed from her face, and the corners of her mouth turned up. "Lead the way." He opened the door, and they hustled through the cold dimness to the box. Within the dark wood walls sat a straggly little girl who gawked at the stranger with scared, big brown eyes. Streaks down her dirty face showed evidence that her brother knew her well. "Why didn't you come home like you promised?" his sister asked softly with a sniffle. A swipe with the back of her hand spread more dirt across her cheek. "It's a long story," he responded, climbing inside the box and rubbing her cold, tiny fingers. The kind woman crouched down and smiled at the young girl, who leaned into her brother's side, the newspaper around her crunching with her movement. Leaning forward, the kind lady said, "Your brother told me a great deal about you, so I wanted to meet you." The little girl hid behind her brother, peeking out with only one eye, her tangled curls hanging over the other. The lady turned back to the young man. "I would like to invite both you and your sister to spend Christmas with me. I have plenty of room. Would you oblige me?" "Honestly?" the boy asked. The woman nodded. The two siblings looked at each other. The boy could barely believe this wonderful opportunity. If he couldn't buy his sister any gifts, at least maybe they could have a warm place to sleep. His sister's face, though, pinched with worry. He grinned and wiped her last tear away from the corner of her eye. After a moment of unspoken trust, her face relaxed. The boy took his sister's hand and coaxed her out of the box, leading her toward the car. The girl's eyes widened as she took in the sleek automobile and snuggled up next to her brother on the seat. As the driver backed out of the dark alley, the children's eyes met. The young boy could see his emotions mirrored in his sister's gaze. They both felt a little in awe and a slight bit worried about what spending the night in the home of a stranger might be like. Once they arrived at the kind woman's home, his sister's glance absorbed every fascinating detail. The woman removed her red coat, handed it to the butler, and spoke in a low voice for a minute. With her heeled shoes clipping on the marble floor, she led the children to a room where they could wash their hands and faces. The little girl looked up at her brother as she rubbed the cream towel in small circles on her cheek. "That towel is as soft as Mama's skin." He tousled her hair. "Maybe close." The butler directed them to a toasty kitchen. The aroma of freshly baked bread and something sweet like apples with cinnamon filled their noses. Both of them peeked at each other with grins stretching across their faces. They breathed in deeply, enjoying the enticing scents. The cook, a round, happy sort of lady, brightened up the kitchen with her cheery personality. She set steaming bowls of soup in front of them and said they could eat as many rolls as they'd like from a heaping basket on the table. Her smile broadened as she poured each of them a cup of milk. His sister's eyes grew round. "A full glass!" she exclaimed in a hush. He nodded and kept eating, too busy to use his mouth for anything else. When he couldn't take another bite and his sister set down the spoon next to her empty bowl, a young woman with short blonde hair and wearing a ruffled white apron came for them. "Are you ready for a bath?" she asked with a hopeful expression. "I have hot water waiting for you, and we are going to get every part of you clean before Christmas comes." With full bellies, clean bodies, dressed in warm pajamas, and snug in beds, they both stared at the sloped ceilings over their heads. "I can't believe it," the little girl whispered. "This is the prettiest room I've ever seen, and we each get our own bed. Our own bed! And this pillow is as soft as a cloud. Does yours feel like that too?" She took a deep breath. "It's like Christmas already. The angels must be watching over us. They must." She rolled over to look at her silent brother, clutching the blanket to her chest in a tiny fist. "Do we have to go back? Do we? I really don't want to." He blew out a soft breath. "I don't know, but we probably do. Tonight has been like a dream. So perfect. But we'd best go to sleep now, okay?" He dreaded their return to the cold, empty wooden box, but he knew he needed to make the best of it for his sister's sake. Very soon, her breathing grew deep and steady, and the young man allowed his heavy eyes to close too. When the two children headed off to wash their grubby faces, the lady of the house rushed back into town to visit the same store where she had met the young boy. As it was closing time, she hastily explained about the two children and what she wanted. With a clap, the head clerk gathered his team of men and women and directed them to collect items from different areas of the store. Everyone, work quickly so we can all get to our Christmas Eve festivities. The clerk scurried around to fill the special order. As each item was selected, one woman wrapped them with bright paper into packages of all shapes and sizes, and another tied them with big bows. Several clerks helped carry all the gifts to the woman's car. She left the store the second time with more packages than she had before and a much broader smile. Christmas morning came with the sun peeking around fluffy gray clouds through the sheer drapes at the children's window. The kind woman tiptoed through the doorway but stopped short. "Oh, you are awake," she said, a smile tugging her lips. "Why did you not get out of bed?" The little girl looked to her brother. He knew she still felt shy around the stranger. "We didn't want to disturb anyone, and besides, we just didn't want to move. It's warm here under the covers," he replied. The lady's eyes glowed with excitement. "Well, would you like to come down and see what's waiting for you under the Christmas tree?" Both children sat straight up in their beds. The little girl curled her feet underneath her and began to bounce on her knees. "A Christmas tree and presents!" she squealed, so exuberant she couldn't hold it in. "I love presents!" Their bare feet padded behind the woman, down the stairs, and into a spacious room, where an enormous Christmas tree stood taller than both of them put together. The round ornament shimmered, tinsel dripping like sparkling icicles from every branch, and the nip of pine filled the air. They barely glanced at the majestic evergreen because the pile of colorful presents under the tree captured their complete attention. "Go ahead," the woman said. "They are all for you." The little girl's mouth fell open. The young man and his sister sat on the floor around the tree and passed the gifts out to each other. The lady of the house observed them with a smile. "Wow!" the boy would exclaim. "Can you believe it?" His sister simply nodded and squealed and hugged each item she unwrapped. There were hats and gloves and coats, not a single hole to be found. There were pants and shirts and dresses, all in just the right sizes, and shoes that a strong young boy could run fast in. When they finally got to the bottom of the pile, one big package awaited each of them. The young man let his sister go first, watching her rip the paper with excited fingers. She opened the box and lifted into her arms the same doll she had pointed out to him from the window store, the exact one she wished she could have. His sister wrapped the baby doll in her arms, its golden ringlets bouncing. Her grin stretched from ear to ear. His turn. He held his breath and carefully pulled back the bright paper, almost scared to open the last magical gift. A train! A real train with an engine, 4 cars, and a caboose. His big eyes darted to his sister. He couldn't believe he had his very own train to play with. Both children grinned. With all the amazing presents, they could stay warm and have fun in their box. The lady of the house gestured for the young man to join her on the couch. He picked up the train engine and sat next to her. The young man thought about the $10 bill and knew she had given them so much more. "Thank you for the wonderful gifts. We've never had a Christmas like this one." "You are welcome. What do you have there?" She pointed to the train in his hands. He explained the sleek engine, that he'd seen a real one at a train station a few years before, and about how similar they were. She listened with interest. "You never fully answered my question," she said, watching his face, "about why you went to such great lengths to return my coin purse." He gazed at the train and spun a wheel with his thumb. He stammered, not knowing how to put his thoughts into words. "Please tell me," she urged. "I want to know what inspires a special young man like you to make such an honest decision and be so courageous in his efforts." He shrugged. "I guess because I knew it wasn't my money, and I couldn't be happy if I kept it, so I had to bring it to you." "What made you come to that conclusion?" she pressed. He exhaled in a slow, deliberate way. "My father used to say, 'Son,'" he lowered his voice to mimic his dad, "you are in charge of your choices. Those choices determine what kind of man you will be. Make sure you can be proud of who you are becoming." He shrugged again. "I just wanted to be like him. He helped people if they dropped their groceries, helped the old lady next door with her yard, and he helped my mother when she was sick. He was honest. One time I heard him tell the man that owned our house that he didn't have the money to pay him, though he knew the man would get mad. He worked hard. Sometimes he left late at night to work an extra job to earn money for our family. And he loved our country so much that he fought and died for it. He was a good man, made great choices he could be proud of. I want to be a good man too, someday. So I guess that's why." His eyes peeked up to gauge her reaction, and his heart dropped when tears trickled down her cheeks. I'm sorry if I said something wrong," he offered in a low, discouraged voice. No. She stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. "You do not need to be sorry. I'm not sad. I am impressed with your love for your sister, your courage to do such a difficult thing, and how you choose to live in integrity, even though stealing would have been a much easier path. You made a brave, hard choice, even though life has taken away almost everything that you hold dear, and hasn't been fair in the slightest. I believe you have the strongest character of any man I have ever met." He looked at her out of the corner of his eye, his mouth quirked to the side in skepticism. "I'm telling you the truth." She leaned down with an encouraging smile, dabbing her eyes with a lacy handkerchief that she tucked back into her sleeve. He couldn't restrain a grin of his own. The woman patted his knee and pushed herself off the couch. "Well, I have one last present." She glanced from one child to the other, watching their expectant faces. She pressed her hands forward to calm them. "Now, this is not something that I could wrap, and it is not something you can play with." The boy scowled in concentration, a pucker forming between his eyebrows, while the little girl looked up in question. The kind woman laughed. "I would like to offer you a home, for you to live here and become my family. Let me take care of you." She added with emotion, thick in her voice, "You see, I don't have any children, and since you don't have parents to care for you, I thought it would be a wonderful chance for both of us." "But we already had a mother," the girl said in a small voice. The woman stooped down and ran a gentle hand over the little girl's pink cheek. "I know, and I would never try to take her place." "But since she's gone," the young man thought out loud, "maybe you could be our second mother?" She gazed at the two children with a hopeful expression as they exchanged a look. When they turned their faces back to her, their eyes sparkled with excitement, as if their dreams had just come true. "I have always wanted children, and to have children that have so much love for each other and are compassionate and courageous will be a blessing beyond my wildest dreams. So what do you both say?" Her smile beamed. "Would you allow me to be your second mother? Would you be my children?" She reached out, arms wide. Both children shot to their feet and rushed into her waiting embrace. The young man could hardly believe the gift he and his sister had received that wondrous Christmas day. Their second mother hung a framed $10 bill in each of their rooms as a reminder. For all the years to come, the young man put his heart and soul into living a life of love, courage, and integrity so that all of his parents would continue to be proud of him, and so that he himself would become the man he had always wanted to be. And if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and like.